Welcome to No Question About That. Today I've got Jonathan Allsopp, who's the author of a new book on FC United called This Thing of Ours. Jonathan, welcome to the show.
Hi, Ed. And thanks for inviting me on.
Yeah, great to have you on. Yeah, I've had George Baker on a couple of times to talk about FC United. I'm sure you know him, and it's always good to check in on the club. I'm a watcher from a distance, although I have my community share certificate still in its original sort of folder in my lockbox. So there you go. Part owner if an absentee landlord here. So. Well, congrats on the book, and it's out now in all the usual places, and it kind of covers both FC United culture in detail, but also the nitty gritty of running a football club under the pressure of like fan ownership and tight budgets and paying for Broadhurst and all of that, and kind of digs into a season of 23-24, but more broadly. So I guess the first question is, why the book? Why now? FC United's 20th anniversary coming up. What inspired you to want to go write this?
Yeah, there's probably three main reasons, to be honest. I mean, the first is obviously it's the 20th anniversary, and thought it'd be a good idea to have, something coming out that celebrated like the first 20 years of the club. And also thought that, when we first set out with our founding manifesto, one of the things we said was that above all, we wanted to be seen as a good example of how supporters can own and run football clubs, and also be of benefit to our community. But we also said at the same time that obviously we were a new club then, and it invited people to be patient, in terms of like achieving those goals. And of course, patience is one of those things that football fans aren't exactly renowned for, isn't it? So I thought, like 20 years on, it might be a good point at which to kind of take stock and look how we're faring in terms of that, those original aims, and particularly bearing in mind, 20 years is it's a long time, but bearing in mind that we compete against clubs in the Northern Premier League that that are more than 120 years old, and in some cases. So there was also that reflection on our first 20 years. I think the second reason was that I felt that we got to a point where we were flying increasingly below the radar. I mean, you could go down busy roads in like North Manchester and see like adverts for, the Welcome to Wrexham documentary.
Mm-hmm.
You'd have like Rob McElhenney and Ryan Reynolds like gazing down at you as you walk down the Queen's Road in North Manchester, and I just thought, actually, that's at a point like within sort of 1.5 miles, 2 miles of Broadhurst Park. And I thought, actually, there's actually a really interesting story here, but one that's very different to the likes of Wrexham and Salford, and kind of going against it feels like there's this kind of modern day obsession with celebrity and wealth, that kind of makes those stories around Salford and Wrexham obviously attractive in terms of who the owners of the football club are. But I thought, actually, barely a couple of miles from there is actually a really good story to tell, which approaches owning the football club from a completely different perspective. It's a collective of of 2,500 people. So that was a big motivation behind it. But actually telling that story, and one of the key themes I think that comes through the book is the fact that we are a collective, and we don't have we don't have that wealthy individual in the background who's able to like bail us out when times are tough. And I think the third reason was perhaps just looking at what fan ownership means in practice. I mean, rather than talking about it as kind of like an abstract concept, or what, kind of like looking at what it actually means on a day-to-day basis. How does a how does a football club that's like wholly owned by its supporters actually cope on a day-to-day basis, in a world where success in football increasingly seems to come down to money. So those were the three main motivations.
In your introduction, you make the comparison with Wrexham and the sort of different trajectories of the two clubs. Played Wrexham a few years ago now when Wrexham were fan-owned, and the fans effectively sold out to Hollywood celebrities, and we've seen where they've gone now. It'd be interesting in a few years' time to take a pulse check on Wrexham fans and whether they're happy with the new influx of tourists from overseas. But one of the really interesting things about the book, I think, is just digging into the nitty-gritty of just how the unique challenges of owning a fan-owned club, both from a financial perspective, challenges with loans, challenges with paying for Broadhurst Park, challenges with getting sponsorship and what that means, given part of the reason, at least, for launching the club back in 2005 was a sort of anti-commercialisation of football generally. So, yeah, tell me a little bit about the day-to-day of FC United and what it's like running this club.
Yeah, I think you've touched on some of the challenges. I mean it's as an overall experience. I think if we go back to the very beginning. I can remember going to the meeting at the Apollo in May 2005, where one of the speakers there was Chris Stewart from AFC Wimbledon, who were really helpful back in those early days in terms of getting the club set up, heading into that first season. And one of the things he said at the time is that setting up and owning your own football club will be one of the best things that you'll ever do. And I think that's right. I think most of us that have that have been with FC over the last sort of 20 years would agree with that. It's been an incredible experience, but like you say, it's not without its challenges. And I think obviously one of the big ones is money, in terms of not having a wealthy financial backer who's able to step in when times are tough. And also, and this is quite sort of covered quite widely. Because my background is as an accountant in my day job. So the finances of the club as we go through the year are covered in quite a lot of detail. And because ultimately we are, our current turnover in the year that we've just been through is £1.4 million. So we are a sizable business, and just using the word business, to be honest, if I go back to like 2005, I would have always balked at like describing a football club as a business. But I think I feel like to some extent we've kind of like grown up a little bit over the last 2 decades, and recognise that this obviously there's the football side of things, but there is also a business there to run. And I think that particularly hit home when we moved into Broadhurst Park in 2015, and at that point had not only football teams to run, but also a facility that costs £6.5 million to build, and loans that were taken out to enable us to build that facility, and the community shares as well, obviously, to then look after, and that introduces a whole different dynamic into the run of the club.
Yeah.
And I think the last sort of decade has been very different to the first sort of decade in terms of running the football club. And I think, like I said earlier, to an extent we have had to grow up and recognise that there is a business to run. And I think just summarising it really, I mean, I think there's kind of like three different elements to it all. I mean, obviously one is the football side, and obviously as football fans, following a football team is an incredibly emotional thing to do, isn't it? And it's often completely irrational, and but then there's also the business side that we need to look after, and that requires a very sort of like cool head at times to be able to manage the finances of of ultimately like a £1.4 million business. There's the challenges that presents, and then there's the third element is our sort of founding ideology, which you mentioned there in terms of the desire to not be overly commercial in the way that we run the club. So there's kind of like three different elements that we're trying to bring together in terms of the overall running of the club.
Yeah, challenging time, I guess, for managing all of those things. It's sort of played out in where FC United is in the pyramid, settled into the Northern Premier, I guess. I mean, there's 3 promotions in the first 3 seasons, and then step forward a few years and a relegation as well. Budget constraints you talk about in the book, being around mid-table in terms of what you can pay the players. Is that... I hate to talk about it like this. Is that FC United's sort of natural home in the Northern Premier League? What dictates the level of ambition here? Does it matter if you ever make the Football League or not? Right? It's a community club. Is that important? Whether you're at step 7, 6, 5, or so on, and it wasn't really part of the founding ideology to say, hey, we're going to make the Football League and rise up the ranks and go challenge the big clubs and all of that. So what are the constraints and what are the hopes and dreams here for the club?
Yeah, that's a good question, because obviously, like you say, it wasn't part of our founding ideology, was it, to set out where we wanted to be in 10, 20, 30 years time. Very different to AFC Wimbledon, where a club like AFC Wimbledon, where there was that desire to get back into the Football League, as soon as they could, their rightful place back in the Football League. And yeah, it's an interesting one, because I think I think different FC fans would perhaps have different views on this. There would probably be some that would be quite content for us to remain in the Northern Premier League for the foreseeable future, whilst there are others who are more ambitious and perhaps would like to see us in the Football League at some point. I mean, in terms of our sort of like business planning, I mean, our latest business plan that we supporters are involved in, like approving the business plans on an annual basis. So the last sort of general meeting that we had in May, we approved business plan for the 25-26 financial year, but within that there was a longer term view as to where we want to be in like 5 years time. So where do we want to be in 2030? And we really set out 3 sort of like broad objectives for ourselves. One of those on the football side was that we said we'd like to be in National League North in 2030 and being able to be run on a sustainable basis in National League North. So I mean, obviously we've been in National League North before. We were promoted there in 2015, so that our first season at Broadhurst Park, we were in National League North. We remained there for 4 seasons. I think it's fair to say we found it tough to compete at that level. And I think what we're saying in the business plan is that we'd like to go back there and be able to compete on a sustainable basis. So that's the target that we've set ourselves, kind of on the football side in 5 years' time as a club. So that's approved by us as co-owners. I think in terms of our support, I mean we tend to split our business plan into 3 distinct areas. So we look at the football, we look at fans, because obviously the match day experience is is such an important part of FC United. And then we look at community because, as I mentioned earlier in our founding manifesto, we said we wanted to be a benefit to our local community in Moston and across North Manchester. So in terms of fans, we've set ourselves the objective of increasing attendances by 25% over the next 5 years. Quite an ambitious plan, I would say, given that our current average is around about 1,700, which is great. For our level of football, I mean, the average last season in the Northern Premier League was around about 750. So you can see that that we're more than twice the average. But actually, it's interesting to see what's happened over the last decade, because what we've seen is attendances in non-league have booed generally. So attendances in the Northern Premier League have roughly doubled. So about 10 years ago, the average attendance in Northern Premier League match was probably around about 400. Now you're looking at 750. Whereas our attendances over the same period have declined a little bit. We were up around the 2,000 mark 10 years ago. We're now about 1,700. So in setting ourselves this target of growing attendances by 25%, we need to address that kind of like downward trend, so that there's
and the base is there, right?
Yeah, definitely. And on the community side, again, we're ambitious to help our local community. We recently, what we're talking about is basically establishing a community wellness hub at Rodez Park. What this means in reality, I mean, we've recently entered into a sort of relationship with the local NHS around things like helping people with long-term health conditions, diabetes, heart disease, etc., to manage those conditions through like services that we can provide at our football ground. So those are the kind of ambitions that we've set ourselves for the next 5 years. And I think that they're ambitious across each of the areas. And we certainly don't want to be, we're certainly not a football club that sees ourselves as standing still.
Yeah. I want to change tack a little bit and talk about the Fenix Trophy, which you cover in the book. On the trip to Milan, obviously, FC United have participated in this tournament, I think, 4 years in a row now. Won it a couple of times as well. And I think for everyone who went, the trip to Milan sounds pretty magical. Chance for this semi-pro team that's only 20 years old to go and play in one of the world's great stadiums. Talk about that experience a little bit and how that tournament has played a part in FC United's development and community links and links with other clubs of similar ilk worldwide.
Yeah, sure. So, I mean, the tournament came about in the idea for it sort of grew in the pandemic period in sort of 2020. A team in Italy, in Milan, called Brera. That's where a guy called Leo Aliotti that first had the idea of a tournament for sort of like-minded non-league football clubs across the continent to come together and play in a tournament. So you've got fan-owned clubs in there, but you've also got clubs with interesting histories and histories of serving the local community. So like for instance, like the first team that we played in the tournament in 2021 was a team from Warsaw called AKSFA, who were, again, they'd set themselves up as a fan-owned club. They've actually been inspired by FC United and what we've done. They were kind of going against the grain in Polish football, where they'd seen the increasing prevalence of the far right amongst Polish football supporters, and what they decided to do as a fan-owned club was try and attract immigrants in Warsaw, and particularly at the time, you've got big influx of Ukrainian refugees that were coming into Warsaw and the rest of Poland at the time. So they were trying to integrate people from different nationalities into their own football team. So it's kind of like the tournament thrives really on stories like that. And I think it's been a really interesting experience to be able to come across clubs like that and just share ideas about running clubs. And it's noticeable that there's quite a few clubs that have, last year we played a team in Montenegro called Fans United, based in the capital Podgorica. And again, they were saying, that they were another fan-owned club that have been inspired by sort of the FC United stories. It's quite interesting. And and in terms of the tournament, as you mentioned, the tournament when was it? A couple of years ago, the final was actually held in the San Siro in Milan, which was, like you say, was an incredible experience. And I think it's one of those weird things where when we left Manchester United to form FC United 20 years ago, we would ever thought that we'd be following a team again in Europe in the San Siro and stadiums like that. 'Cause, we thought that would have all been left behind, kind of thing. So it was an incredible experience, because you got quite a few supporters there that had actually been in the same stadium watching United in in sort of Champions League quarterfinals, etc. So
amazing. In the book, you also talk about the women's team, FC United Women, on the struggles with both attracting players and building that team. Why did the club launch a women's team? I guess is the obvious question. There's an obvious answer to. And how difficult is it forming a women's team at that level?
Yeah, and the women's team was formed in 2012, so it's been around for quite a while now. And interestingly, it was a good sort of 6 years before Manchester United actually did the same. So the driver was clearly that in our founding manifesto it says we want to be benefit to our local community. So half of that community, is female, so it makes sense, obviously, that we have a women's football team. That team, at its peak, rose to the fourth tier in the women's pyramid 2-3 years ago now. What we found since the England women's team won the Euros in 2021 is just such a change in the women's game in terms of the level of interest, the level of commercial interest that it's generated. So pretty much almost throughout our entire sort of women's team history, the players have effectively played, they haven't been paid, but this actual influx of money now into the women's game has meant that we have had to consider things like paying the players. So we actually tried it now last season, and it's become increasingly difficult for us to compete, I think, in the women's game. So we were relegated from the fourth tier back down to the fifth tier last season we had a tough season, but we did manage to stay at that level. I think it's fair to say at the moment we're trying to take stock of where we are in terms of our women's team and what our ambitions are going forward. But yeah, I mean,
and presumably at the fifth tier, there's not an awful lot of income there. No broadcast money, some gate receipts. It's a challenging economic model it's a challenging economic model at all levels. I think we see that even with Manchester United, where there is, let's say, limited interest from the new owners in that team. How do you see it as both a business and a community asset to run that team?
It's interesting because when you start talking about the level of interest in the team, I mean, in terms of supporter interest, we've had gates of up to like in excess of 300, which is pretty good at this level. And also in terms of commercial interest, I mean, it's actually referenced in the book around the sort of sponsorship that we received for a time from the Pretty Little Thing, the sort of like women's fashion retailer that's based in Manchester. And I think on the back of the success of the England team in 2021, decided that they were really keen to like support our women's team. They liked what we were doing in terms of owning a women's team, be like what we were doing in the community, and they sponsored us on that basis, and that was actually today was actually the single biggest commercial deal that we've had in our 20 years, and that was on the back of that was on the back of of having a women's team and also being active in the local community.
I'm going to talk a little bit about community engagement and fan dialogue. It's at the heart of what FC United does. We have Sir Jim coming along to Manchester United, buying a stake and making a big deal about community engagement and fan dialogue, and then, well, let's say fucking the fans over on ticket prices and not doing that at all. I think it's a fair assessment. They may push back on that one. Like, is fan and community engagement still important? I mean, I know it is to FC United, and obviously supporters direct. I've had them on the program before to talk about fan engagement and fan engagement models. Like, how central is that going forward to FC United and to the game more generally, when it feels like clubs at the elite super level are just drifting away from fans as fans and doubling down on fans as customers and consumers of a product?
Yeah, I mean, so it's a good question. I mean, in terms of FC United, I mean, fans and fan engagement is absolutely central to the whole way that the club is run. It's 100% supporter owned, and support. Everywhere you look in the football club, whether it's on the terraces, in the office, in the boardroom, in the bars, it's fans that are there, that are owning and running the football club. And in terms of we've got a collective, like I said earlier, of about 2,500 co-owners. In terms of the level of engagement that we're getting, I think we're a democratically run club, so we vote on things like ticket prices, kits, new season, and then as I mentioned earlier on, we play a role in like approving the annual business plans, which is obviously one of the big sort of key decisions of the year. There are lots of other issues where fans are set the agenda. we introduced online voting, as I talked about in the book, like a couple of years ago. Mm-hmm. Since then, we tended to have around about the 600 mark in terms of like the level of engagement, which so in terms of like eligible voters, we've probably got about 1,800 out of the 2,500. The rest of the membership being junior members who aren't able to vote until they're 16. So you're probably talking about a turnout of around like 30 to 33%, which, we'd like it to be higher, but it's still pretty good going. But when you look, for instance, at like the last sort of like Greater Manchester mayoral election, I think Andy Burnham was elected on a turnout of around about 30%. So it's pretty good in that context. Other measures of
for a comparison, local school board election where I live was really important because of cuts. We'll get probably low single digit turnout on that election as well.
Yeah, I can imagine, because it can be a struggle to get people engaged, and we've kind of got various measures really of sort of like the democratic health of the club. I mean, one of the other things we do in terms of our monthly board meetings is we actually produce like a summary report of each board meeting, and then that is mailed out to co-owners sort of like within a few days of the meeting, so they can be kept informed, what's going on at sort of like the board level kind of thing. And we know that's typically read by about sort of like 300 to 400 of co-owners. So you've probably got that core of 300 to 400 there, what you probably describe as active members that are keeping on abreast of all the issues that are affecting the club. And obviously we'd like that to be higher. When we do, we do as much as we possibly can to help people to become engaged in the club. But equally, we appreciate that there are some supporters out there that just like to come and watch the football and don't want any much engagement above that. But no, I mean fans are absolutely at the core of everything that the club does, really. And I mean, in terms of the broader picture, I mean, it's interesting this season because the 1958 group at United actually got in touch with us towards the end of last season around, obviously the struggle that's going on at Old Trafford in terms of like fan engagement and the ownership of the club, etc. And that's been an interesting one, because they then subsequently came to a game in March, which a number of like United fans came to Broadhurst Park for the first time, and I think we're quite surprised. Some of them were quite surprised, I think, to see like lots of like Manchester United memorabilia up around the place, lots of like United flags like all around the ground, because I think some of them thought it might be kind of a hostile place for United fans, but that's kind of like not the case at all. We are at heart, the ones that moved, the ones that set up in the club, the FC United in 2005, we are at heart like Manchester United fans, and and Broadhurst Park very much reflects that. So that was interesting, and it was interesting to exchange, the sort of like those at the forefront of the 1958 group net with members of the FC United board to like kind of like exchange ideas and views on what's on the current situation at Old Trafford, because we've been quite outspoken about what's going on at United over the last sort of like year to 18 months. I think it was the 1958 group recognised that they'd seen social media posts by FC, recognise that, and then and then got in touch on the back of that. And I think there was that's kind of like prompted quite a bit of sort of media interest. I think that that we are there and still still interested in what's going on at United. And I think there was an article by Danny Taylor in the Athletic in May, where after he'd come to a match at Broadhurst Park, where he described FC United as what we were doing essentially was a fight, a struggle for like fan culture, to preserve fan culture. And I guess that's the kind of input that we can. That's kind of where we can help the group like the 1958 to in their fight to kind of preserve some sort of fan culture at United. But obviously that's going to be tough, with what's going on at the moment.
Yeah, I mean, it most certainly is, and it's such a global club that what does fan culture mean in a sense as well? There's the local fans who many of them have been priced out over the years and are likely to get priced out again with the new ticketing arrangements, both general price increases, individual match going price increases, and the new tiered system, which is going to make it even more difficult. There's a kind of lip service paid to fan communication. There's a fans forum. I couldn't honestly point to a thing that forum has changed the club's mind on significantly. That's not against the fans. That's more about the club. They're going to do what they want to do anyway because they're run by a bunch of billionaires, whether American or tax exiles in Monaco. So how much do they care? Really, it's hard to say yet. Sir Jim has he talked a good game about being from Failsworth and being local and all of that, but doesn't really seem to be tapped into fan culture at all. And why would he be? Hasn't lived there for many decades now. So yeah, it's a real and very stark challenge. And it's not just Manchester United; it's across the Premier League and the Football League as well, because we see many horrendous examples of bad ownership who just don't care what the fans think. I mean, current crisis at Sheffield Wednesday, for example, with Jaziri not really being able to afford to own the club and having separated the ground from the team and the training ground. There's a very dark future, looks like that. It's just one example of many owners just not caring about fans and what fans think. All right, I wanted to talk a little bit about the Boardroom, because FC United hasn't been without its political challenges over the years. The board was swept out at one point. It got quite controversial online with minutes of meetings being posted and so on. And an ongoing question about executive leadership as well, changes at CEO level and so on. So how challenging is that in a fan-owned environment to get the right executive team, make sure there isn't burnout amongst board members, it's voluntary most of it, and have the balance with having a properly run business club as well as it being very tightly knit into the fan community?
I mean it's a big challenge, obviously. I mean the situation in 2015, 2016 that you've just sort of touched on there was essentially an issue around transparency, I think, in more than anything, and a feeling that, I mean, we set out as to be a democratically owned and run football club, and a feeling that wasn't what was happening at the time. There'd been an erosion of that democracy, a loss of transparency, and as a result, there was a period there for probably about 12 months where it was quite acrimonious and resulted in virtually a whole board standing down and a new one being elected in the summer of 2016, and that new board being absolutely committed to transparency in what it does, and that was when we started producing the summary board reports I just mentioned earlier on. That fans, that owners of the club could see within a few working days of each monthly board meeting what had actually been discussed at that board meeting. So, that was a big step forward at the time in terms of the level of transparency in which we were operating. In terms of the skills, that you need around the board table to run a football club, it is a challenge, and it's one of the ones that we recognise. We do sort of like hold a risk register at the club, and the one of those risks is around having board members, with the right skills that you need to run a football club. I mean, obviously one of those is things like finance, around like human resources, technology, legal issues. There's all sorts of like different areas where you need kind of expertise to be able to run the club. Obviously, one of the strengths of the club is that you've got 2,500 people coming together. Those people have got lots of like different skills, different knowledge, expertise, etc. So we are very heavily able to draw on that expertise. And I think the board, I think it would be fair to say that the board that we've got now, that we've had for like the last sort of 18 months, is probably the strongest that we've had in our history in terms of like the range of skills that you've got on that board. Like for instance, you've got a chair like Nick Boom, who's worked at a very high level in the banking sector, who's able to bring a whole set of skills around like running businesses to the table. You've got others that have come from like public sector background at a very at a very senior level. So there's a whole there's others that have got like significant like commercial experience, others that have worked in the community across North Manchester and beyond. So there's a whole range of skills there that that we absolutely need to run a club, and it will be, it does present a challenge going forward, because inevitably you do get burnout. I think there's probably a useful life for any sort of board member, and it's that the board that we've got at the moment, a lot of those board members are working like very long hours on FC United related business, and there's only so long that you can naturally that you can do that for. So it does, like you say, it does present a challenge going forward for the club. What we've done to try and address that is form committees to cover each sort of area. So we've got committees that cover like co-ownership, community, commercial, football. So each of like 6 key sort of like departments across the club. We've got a committee of co-owners, mostly with like sort of expertise in those particular areas, to take some of the pressure off the board, to deal with some of the tasks that perhaps the board haven't got sufficient capacity to deal with. And naturally, over time, that involvement in the committees means you've got people that are almost but not quite operating at board level there. But it gives you a feel for what it might take to be actually on the board at FC United. And what we've seen is that a number of the current board actually started out at that committee level. I think like 3 or 4 of the current board moved, stood for the board, having already been like working at committee level. So I think that is one way that we're kind of like trying to future-proof ourselves when it comes to like, you know, future board members.
Right. What does the future of fan ownership look like? I mean, it's something you touch on in your book. Nothing stays the same. We all move forward. I mean, has this experience of building FC United kind of solidified your thinking around, you know, the importance of fan ownership? It's kind of interesting because in England, it's really at this sort of level that fan ownership operates. Obviously, we have AFC Wimbledon, who are at a slightly higher level. In Europe, in Germany, you have 50+1, so it's baked in. In Spain, it was kind of legislated for socios clubs. Don't necessarily operate quite the same way. But are you feeling confident about what fan ownership means at this time in football?
Yeah, again, that's a good question. I mean, so I think, yeah, I mean, it was interesting when, for instance, like Exeter City celebrated their 20th anniversary a couple of years ago. So I think their chair at the time sort of said something along the lines of, you know, that if ultimately as a fan-owned club, if all you're bothered about is, you know, is how you feel at like 5 o'clock on a Saturday afternoon, then, you know, you're not doing it right, kind of thing, because there's much more to fan ownership than what happens on the pitch. Obviously, that's a big part of it, but in terms of like assessing the success of a fan-owned club, it's not just about what happens on the pitch. It is around things like what are you doing in your community, you know, the long-term sustainability of the club. And it was interesting that they also said that they felt, so Exeter are currently in League One, aren't they? You know, they're a very well-run club, but interesting that they also said that they felt that was probably the ceiling, realistically, the ceiling for them as, you know, as a fan-owned club. And I think, you know, there's been a lot of Wimbledon have been like quite open, I think, about the challenges that they face, having just been promoted from League Two last season into League One, you know, next season. And again, you know, it's a similar thing. As a fan-owned club, it's very, very challenging to move into that level. So it's a big challenge, you know, and that's for clubs that are ultimately like majority fan-owned. So they've already invited an investment to a certain extent. In terms of fan clubs like ourselves that are wholly fan-owned, I feel like realistically at the moment, the ceiling for us would probably be the National League. I mean, as I mentioned earlier, we've set ourselves that target of, you know, getting into the National League North by 2030. That next step up into the National League would then, you know, that would be another big step. But I think, you know, with an ownership model that is fully fan owned, I think, you know, at the moment, getting into the Football League feels like it's a long way away. And I think it's, you know, I mean, ultimately that was why Wrexham fans decided to do what they did in 2020, was it? Because they kind of, you know, they were keen, you know, they'd spent a long time in non-league. They were keen to get back into the Football League, felt that fan ownership was kind of a handicap to that. And, you know, and so invited that investment. And, you know, I mean, that was what they were, you know, what they wanted to do in terms of their club, and you know, good luck to them. There was perfectly good reasons why they wanted to do that. And equally, you're seeing other clubs, you know, we're looking around at the moment. I mean, there's only, when you look at supporter ownership across England in football, there's only 37 supporter-owned clubs. I mean, when you think that there's more than 1,000 football clubs in like the top 10 tiers of the English football pyramid, so less than 4% of clubs are fan-owned. Within that, you've got clubs like Exeter and Wimbledon that are majority fan-owned. You've probably got less than 30 that are fully fan-owned, like ourselves. And then you look around at those other clubs, and in terms of their size, the vast majority of them are much smaller than us. They're operating at a much smaller level in terms of like finances, in terms of like support, and the level that they're playing. I mean, for instance, it's interesting that like Liverpool fans set up AFC Liverpool in 2008. Only 3 years after we set up FC United as an affordable alternative to going to Anfield at the time. And AFC Liverpool still going, but they're in the North West Counties League, and their average crowds are around about the 100 to 150 mark. So it's a very, very different club, and and a very, very different feel to that club to FC United. So it's interesting. And then you've got other clubs that fully fan-owned, like Banbury and Basingstoke, that we've played in friendly matches in recent years that are also exploring the idea of inviting outside investment, because it's a struggle in the current climate to run fan-owned clubs. So I think it feels like we're increasingly like going against the flow in terms of fan ownership. But I think that the potential game changer in all this, of course, is the football governance bill that's currently working its way through Parliament. And I guess the hope with that is that there's some sort of change in terms of like the distribution of finances down the pyramid. That is what we'd hope for, and that it would introduce a little bit more of a, it's never going to be a level playing field, is it? But it would introduce a little bit more fairness into the process. That's the hope. But it's at the moment it tends to be a conversation around like effectively football down to National League level. So the conversation really at the moment isn't around. It doesn't include like the likes of the Northern Premier League, which is a concern for us, because we're very we're very clear that we want that conversation to be about the whole of the football pyramid, not just just part of it.
The finances are very skewed, not just from the Premier League to the Championship, but from the Championship to League One and then the National League. I think that's probably not well understood often, or even really covered by any media at all. We'll see what happens with the Football Governance Bill. It's unclear whether that will actually give powers to the regulator to force distribution, or whether that will come through negotiations, of course, between the Premier League and the Football League. And the thing you said about 1,000 clubs, well, they all want to kill each other because it's hyper competitive in football, and that's what makes football, both in England and worldwide, really challenging. And unless you get closed leagues, like I'm based in the States, as listeners will know, and they're all closed leagues, there's really no promotion and relegation through any of the leagues. And that makes it financially stable, I guess, but at a cost of clubs who want to be ambitious and move up the ladders and so on. So, which is very much about, that's the ethos of the pyramid, isn't it? It's a pyramid. So sometimes you want to move up. All right. Well, Jonathan, fascinating book. I really enjoyed this. And as I said, I've been a watcher from afar. I don't know whether antidote's the right word here for FC United, but it's needed in a climate of football where every single Premier League club is owned by a billionaire, bar Brentford. And even there, he's, massively wealthy, Matthew Benham. So we need community-owned clubs to remind us that football clubs are community assets. That's where they started. And despite the mega money, there's still that deep DNA, I hope, anyway. So the book's This Thing of Ours, it's out now, everywhere. I will link in the show notes for anyone who wants to purchase a copy. Jonathan, I really appreciate your time today.
That's great. Thanks for inviting me on.